Hi, my friends and dear viewers. How are you all? I hope you're doing great. Welcome to our channel, i3 Explainer. Today, we're back with another Avengers sequel for you. This one is the 2019 movie, Avengers Endgame. We know that the previous Avengers sequel, Avengers Infinity War, was released in 2018, and that movie received an incredible response from audiences. That's why its next sequel, Avengers Endgame, was made and released in 2019. And this movie became massively popular with audiences, reaching an incredible level of popularity among viewers of all ages. So, without wasting any more time, let's explain this movie. With just that snap of Thanos' fingers, half of all life in the universe turned to dust in an instant. And this event wasn't just a massive disaster for Earth or the Avengers. It was as if every person's personal life had been completely destroyed in a single moment. Clint Barton, whom we know as Hawkeye, had already stepped away from his superhero identity and was spending time with his family. But that peaceful life was shattered right before his eyes. His wife and children disappeared one by one, turning to dust and fading away into the air right in front of him. Clint could do nothing. He could only stand there helplessly and watch the people closest to him disappear. This moment completely changed the person he was inside. He was no longer the same Hawkeye we knew before. Instead, hiding his identity and taking the name Ronin, he began punishing criminals like a ruthless judge. In his mind, if good people who had done nothing wrong could be unfairly erased from the world, then what right did criminals who were still alive have to keep living? As a result, Clint's sense of justice slowly turned into an obsession with revenge. Meanwhile, after the brutal battle with Thanos on Titan, the situation was even more tragic. Tony Stark and Nebula were the only ones left alive there. The two of them were essentially drifting through space inside a damaged spaceship. There was almost no food left on the ship. Their oxygen supply was rapidly running out, and there was no way for them to return to Earth. Tony realized that this might be the final moments of his life. So, mentally preparing himself for death, he even recorded one last message for Pepper Potts. After all the huge battles he had been through, in his final moments, Tony was still thinking about his family and the person he loved. Just when it seemed like there was absolutely no hope left, Carol Danvers, also known as Captain Marvel, arrived. She rescued Tony and Nebula, brought them back to Earth, and took them directly to the Avengers headquarters. At least Tony now had a chance to return to the world he knew. But even after returning to Earth, the problem wasn't solved. Instead, a new question came up. Where is Thanos? Everyone knew that he was alive somewhere, but no one knew where he was. This is where Nebula's information became extremely important. Because Nebula wasn't just an enemy of Thanos. She was his daughter. She had an understanding of her father's nature, the way he thought, and the possible places where he might be hiding. Sometime later, a powerful energy signal was detected coming from a distant planet in space. Everyone realized that this could be a clue to Thanos' location. So, without wasting any more time, the Avengers headed there. But when they arrived, they saw something that was both shocking and disappointing at the same time. Thanos was actually there, but he no longer had any of the Infinity Stones. At first, this might sound like good news, but the truth was even more frightening. After completing his goal, Thanos had destroyed all the Infinity Stones. In other words, he didn't just erase half of all life in the universe. He also made sure that no one could use the stones in the future to undo what he had done. Now it became clear just how carefully Thanos had planned everything. He knew that someday someone might come looking for him, so he destroyed the very sources of his power, making sure that the disaster he had created could never be reversed. Hearing this made the Avengers even more furious. Thor, in particular, was struggling to control his anger and guilt. During the previous battle, he had gotten a chance to stop Thanos at the last moment, but instead of striking him in the head, he struck him in the chest. That mistake had stayed in his mind. This time, without taking any chances, Thor directly used his weapon to kill Thanos. But it brought him no happiness, because even though Thanos was dead, the people who had been lost were still gone. It was as if, even after getting his revenge, the wound remained exactly the same. With even their last hope gone, the Avengers slowly withdrew from their old lives. Some had lost their families, some were suffering from guilt, while others were simply trying to accept reality and keep living. And just like that, 5 years passed. Then, one day, something strange suddenly happened. Scott Lang, also known as Ant-Man, emerges from the quantum realm. But to him, it felt like he had only been there for a few hours. The truth was that after the snap, the people outside who could have brought him out of the quantum realm had turned to dust, so there was no one left to rescue him. As a result, he remained trapped there on his own. Eventually, through the completely unexpected actions of a rat, the quantum tunnel was activated, allowing Scott to escape. But when he came outside and saw what had happened, he was completely stunned. Because while only a few hours had passed for him, an entire 5 years had actually passed on Earth. And this is where something really interesting comes up. The passage of time in the quantum realm does not work the same way as it does in the real world. This strange difference in time gives Scott an idea that no one had thought of before. If it's somehow possible to manipulate time through the quantum realm, then could they travel back into the past? And if they could go back in time, could they return to the period before Thanos' snap and collect the Infinity Stones? If so, maybe they could create a chance to bring back all the people who had been lost in the present. Normally, an idea like this would simply be dismissed as crazy. But at this point, the Avengers had nothing left to lose. So Scott takes his idea to Captain America and Black Widow. At first, even they don't understand whether this would actually be possible. But the situation was such that even if it seemed impossible, they had no other choice but to try. Then, together, they go to Tony Stark. Because if they wanted to carry out such a dangerous plan involving time travel, they needed the help of a brilliant scientist like Tony. But when they get there, the Tony they see is no longer the same Tony as before. His life has changed a lot over the past 5 years. He is now settled down, living with Pepper, and has built a new, peaceful life with his young daughter. After all the years of war and destruction, he has finally found the kind of life he always wanted. So when the Avengers once again propose going back in time and undoing what Thanos did, Tony cannot easily agree. Because he knows that this plan isn't just dangerous, the cost of failure could be devastating. And more importantly, this time, he has a family to lose. So, Tony is faced with a difficult decision. Should he put his peaceful life at risk once again to bring back all the people lost across the universe? Or should he choose his family for the first time and walk away from the war? From here, the story begins moving toward an even bigger and more daring mission. Meanwhile, with Tony refusing to join them, the Avengers still don't have many options left. So they decide to seek the help of Bruce Banner. But after 5 years, Bruce himself is no longer the same. Before, he had two separate sides within him. On one side, there was the calm and intelligent scientist Bruce Banner, and on the other, there was the incredibly angry and destructive Hulk. But this time, he has managed to combine those two sides into one. The result is a strange but pretty awesome character, the body of the Hulk, but the mind is completely Bruce's. Everyone begins to know him as Professor Hulk. Now, instead of suddenly getting angry and smashing everything around him, he can calmly analyze situations. And to solve a problem as massive as time travel, that was exactly the kind of person they needed. Meanwhile, no matter how uninterested Tony appears on the outside, deep down, he continues thinking about the idea. Eventually, using his own research and extraordinary intelligence, he figures out the equation for time travel. In other words, while the Avengers had been searching for a solution to what seemed like an impossible problem, Tony analyzes the entire concept in his own way and comes up with a method that makes traveling into the past possible. This is where we see why Tony is so important. He may not have wanted to join the mission at first, but once he realizes that it is actually possible, he no longer holds back. Instead, he willingly returns to the team. And not only does he return, but his old conflict with Captain America also seems to be somewhat resolved. Tony returns Steve's old shield to him. The scene is small, but it carries a lot of emotion, because the shield wasn't just a weapon. It was also a symbol of their old relationship and their broken friendship. Now the real mission begins. The few Avengers who are still living their lives in their own ways need to be brought back together in one place. First, they need Thor. But Thor's condition is completely different by this point. He is living in Norway with the people of New Asgard, but the person he once was seems to have completely fallen apart. The guilt of failing to stop Thanos constantly eats away at him. He knows that he had a chance to finish Thanos, but he failed to strike him in the right place at the right moment. After that failure, Thor has withdrawn into himself. Instead of the confident and powerful warrior he once was, he has become depressed, lazy, and emotionally broken. Just look at what happened. The same Thor who once stood alone against hundreds of enemies on the battlefield now can't even escape the memories of his own failure. Bruce and Rocket try to convince him that this time they may actually have a chance to fix everything. At first, Thor doesn't want to get involved in the whole thing, but eventually he realizes that if they really have a chance to travel back in time, then there is at least a possibility of repairing the damage Thanos caused. So he returns to the team as well. However, the guilt inside him still hasn't completely disappeared. Meanwhile, Natasha heads out on another difficult mission. She needs to find Clint Barton, who is no longer known as Hawkeye. Under the identity of Ronin, he has been traveling around different parts of the world and brutally killing criminals. Eventually, they track him down in Tokyo. Clint is no longer the family man he used to be. His eyes are filled with nothing but anger, pain, and revenge. Natasha tells him that a real opportunity may have finally come to bring back the people they lost. Those words change everything for Clint, because ever since he lost his wife and children, the only purpose left in his life had been punishing criminals. But if there really is a way to bring his family back, then there would no longer be any reason for him to keep living for revenge. So Clint returns to the Avengers alongside Natasha. Then comes the most important test. The time travel technology has been created, but no one knows whether it will actually work. So, as an experiment, Clint is sent into the past. And as soon as he gets there, something unexpected happens. Clint sees his family alive. The people he had believed were dead for 5 years are still living a normal life at another point in time. This moment is incredibly emotional for him, because for all these years, he had only carried the pain of losing them. And now, suddenly, he can see them right in front of his eyes. But after the experiment succeeds, another important thing becomes clear. They cannot use time travel according to the usual rules we see in movies. Bruce then explains a complicated rule of time travel to everyone. The thing is, if they go into the past and change an event, it doesn't mean their present will simply be changed directly. Instead, that change will create a separate, parallel timeline. In other words, even if they went back in time and killed a younger Thanos, the events from 5 years earlier in their own present would not simply disappear. In their own timeline, Thanos has already carried out the snap. So killing a younger Thanos would accomplish nothing. It would only create another separate reality. Now it becomes clear that their mission is not to go back into the past and stop Thanos. Their real goal is to temporarily collect the Infinity Stones from the past, bring them into the present, and use them to bring back the people who were lost. However, there is another important rule. Once the mission is complete, the stones must be returned to exactly the same time and place from which they were taken. Otherwise, major problems could be created in those timelines. In other words, the mission isn't simply an easy go get the stones operation. They have to collect all 6 stones, fix the disaster in the present, and then return the stones to the past. One small mistake could lead to a massive disaster. Now that they understand everything, the Avengers divide themselves into different teams. Each team has to travel to a specific time and a specific location. Tony, Captain America, Hulk, and Scott Lang are sent to New York in 2012. And there is an important reason why they choose this particular time. This is the exact period when the massive battle from the first Avengers movie is taking place in New York. On one side, the Avengers are fighting an alien army, while in the middle of all this chaos, 3 important Infinity Stones can be found. Their first target is the Mind Stone inside Loki's scepter. The second is the Space Stone inside the Tesseract. And the third is with the Ancient One, the Time Stone. So, they need to collect 3 stones from 3 different locations during the same period of time. It may sound easy, but in reality, it is anything but simple. The biggest obstacle, especially when it comes to obtaining the Time Stone, is the Ancient One. When Hulk goes to her and asks for the Time Stone, she refuses to simply hand it over, because she knows that removing an Infinity Stone from one timeline could drastically alter the future of that timeline. Her responsibility is to protect the timeline of Earth. So no matter how much Hulk tries to explain the situation, the Ancient One initially remains firm in her decision. But then, Hulk explains the events of the future to her. He tells her that in the future, Doctor Strange himself willingly handed the Time Stone over to Thanos. In other words, Strange didn't do it by mistake or because he was forced to. After seeing billions of possible futures, he made that decision for a specific reason. This information becomes extremely important to the Ancient One. She realizes that if Strange willingly gave the stone away in the future, then what is happening now is probably also part of that much larger plan. In the end, she gives the Time Stone to Hulk. But the entire situation is still extremely dangerous, because the Avengers now have an opportunity. But at the same time, they have stepped into a game where time, reality, and countless possible futures are all connected to one another. And now they have only one goal: to collect all 6 stones and somehow repair the impossible damage that has been done to the present. Meanwhile, things weren't going exactly according to plan in New York in 2012. The Tesseract, or Space Stone, had come into the Avengers' possession. But in the middle of the chaos, Loki gets an opportunity to escape with it. This creates a major problem because their entire plan was to collect the stones from the past and safely bring them back to the present. Now one of the stones is out of their hands. At the same time, Captain America finds himself in a situation that even he finds unbelievable. He has to face his own past version. The same person, the same strength, the same shield. One is Steve from the past, while the other is Steve who has come from the future. Their fight is pretty awesome to watch, but at the same time, it's incredibly strange, because Captain America has to deal with another version of himself. After losing the Tesseract, Tony and Captain America realize they have no easy option left. So they decide they have to go even further back, to 1970. Because at a military base during that time, not only is the Tesseract stored there, but they can also find the special particles needed for quantum travel. In other words, they have a chance to collect 2 important things at once. But when Tony gets there, he experiences one of the most emotional moments of the entire mission. Tony meets his father, Howard Stark. His father has no idea that the man standing in front of him is actually his own son from the future. That makes the moment even more unusual for Tony. He gets a chance to stand in the past and talk to the father with whom his relationship had never been particularly easy. He even hears his father talk about his love for his family and child. And Tony feels something change inside him. The situation is basically this. Tony has created a life with his own daughter in the future, and through this brief meeting with his father, he seems to understand that life in a new way. Meanwhile, that location in 1970 is also extremely important for Captain America. He ends up seeing Peggy Carter there. Peggy was his old love, the person from whom Steve had been separated for so long. When Steve sees Peggy from a distance, it's almost as if he is standing face to face with his old life for a moment. He knows that his real time is somewhere else now, but the woman he once loved is standing right there. The woman with whom he never got the chance to live a normal life. The moment is very quiet, but it carries a tremendous amount of emotion. Meanwhile, the other teams are busy with their own missions. Thor and Rocket's destination is Asgard in 2013. At that time, the Reality Stone, or the Ether, is hidden inside Jane Foster. So their job is to extract the Ether from Jane. But for Thor, this trip isn't just a mission to collect a stone, because he has returned to his old home at a time when his mother is still alive. After the battle with Thanos, his failure, and the loss of his confidence, Thor is emotionally broken, and in that condition, seeing his mother again causes his emotions to completely overwhelm him. Thor's mother realizes immediately that her son isn't in a normal state. Even though Thor tries to hide something, his mother sees right through him. The strange thing is that she realizes Thor has come from the future. She may not know the entire story, but by looking at her son, she understands that something major has happened in his life. This meeting becomes incredibly important for Thor, because until this point, he had been seeing himself only as a failed warrior. But his mother helps him understand that a person's worth doesn't depend only on their strength, or whether they win or lose in battle. Those words help bring some of Thor's confidence back. Meanwhile, Nebula and Rhodey's mission is even more dangerous. They travel to a distant planet in 2014 to collect the Power Stone. At that time, Thanos and his army are there as well. In other words, the Avengers have entered a period when Thanos has not yet carried out his biggest plan. And this is where one of the most dangerous events in the movie takes place. The Nebula from the present comes face to face with the Nebula from that time. Although the two Nebulas are the same person, their lives are now going in completely different directions. And even more dangerously, their memories are connected to each other through a kind of cybernetic link. As a result, the memories of the future Nebula reach Thanos through the Nebula from the past. Thanos then realizes what is going to happen in the future. He learns that the Avengers have traveled back in time, are collecting the Infinity Stones, and are planning to undo his snap. In other words, while the Avengers think they have secretly traveled into the past to carry out their mission, Thanos now knows their entire plan. Now it becomes clear why the events that follow become so terrifying. Thanos doesn't stop after learning about the future plan. He decides to use the Nebula from the past to his advantage. While the Nebula from the present is captured, the Nebula from the past is altered and sent into the future. In other words, someone is able to infiltrate the Avengers in place of one of their own, someone who is actually working for Thanos. And this spy eventually opens the door to destroying the Avengers' entire plan. Meanwhile, Clint and Natasha arrive on Vormir to collect the Soul Stone. There, the Red Skull appears before them once again. He explains that the rules for obtaining this stone are different from all the others. To obtain the Soul Stone, you have to lose the person you love the most. In other words, one of the two must sacrifice themselves. After hearing this, both of them realize what kind of horrifying decision they are facing. No one wants the other person to die. Clint believes that he needs to stay alive so he can bring his family back, while Natasha believes that Clint has a family, so he should be the one to survive. Both of them want to save each other. As a result, the situation reaches a point where they start fighting each other over who will make the sacrifice. In the end, Natasha manages to restrain Clint and jumps down herself, sacrificing her own life. Clint tries to stop her, But there is nothing he can do anymore. Natasha dies, and in exchange for her sacrifice, the Soul Stone comes into Clint's hands. But there is absolutely no happiness in obtaining the stone. Because Clint knows that the price of this stone was losing one of the people closest to him. Finally, all 6 Infinity Stones are in the Avengers' possession. Now they face the final step, using the power of these stones to bring back everyone who was lost in the snap. But they need someone powerful enough to handle such an enormous amount of energy. In the end, Bruce Banner himself takes the gauntlet. Because it is believed that the Hulk's body will be able to withstand at least some of this power. After putting on the gauntlet, Bruce makes that famous snap, and in an instant, the people who had disappeared begin coming back to life. After all the suffering, waiting, and disappointment, it finally seems like the Avengers have succeeded. But the happiness doesn't last for long, because the nebula from the past has already infiltrated the Avengers' headquarters in the present. With her help, the quantum tunnel is opened, and the 2014 version of Thanos comes directly into the present with his massive army. Within moments, the Avengers' headquarters is reduced to rubble. Their plan to spend 5 years bringing back everyone they had lost has succeeded, only for a new danger to appear right at that moment. And this version of Thanos is even more terrifying than the one they knew before. Because the goal of the 2018 Thanos was, in his words, to restore balance to the universe. But when the 2014 Thanos learns about the events of the future, his way of thinking changes completely. He realizes that people will never accept the new reality he created. So this time, he doesn't want to stop after erasing half of all life. His plan is even more terrifying: destroy the entire universe and create a new one according to his own will. In other words, Thanos is no longer seeking balance. His goal is complete destruction and the creation of a new reality under his own rules. Most dangerous part is that the Avengers thought they could go into the past and fix what Thanos had done before he could ever change history. But instead, Thanos from the past has come directly into their future, and he has brought an enormous army with him. So even after getting all 6 stones and reversing the snap, their battle isn't over. In fact, an even bigger war is about to begin. Once the battle starts, the situation quickly begins slipping out of the Avengers' control. On one side is Thanos' massive army, and on the other are only a handful of Avengers. Everything makes it seem like all the planning they had done for 5 years might fail once again at the very last moment. Meanwhile, Gamora and the future Nebula try to stop the Nebula from the past. Because this Nebula was working for Thanos and had become an important part of his entire plan. In the end, the two of them managed to take her down. This moment is important because Nebula is forced to face that dark version of her past self, almost as if she is defeating the life she once lived. Meanwhile, something happens on the battlefield that leaves almost everyone completely stunned. While fighting Thanos, Thor loses Mjolnir, and until this point, it had always been believed that only Thor could wield the weapon. But suddenly, Captain America picks up Mjolnir. Lightning immediately begins striking, and Steve is seen standing in front of Thanos with Mjolnir in his hand. This moment is seriously awesome because, for so long, we had seen Thor consider himself worthy of Mjolnir, but now it becomes clear that Captain America has earned that same worthiness. Thor himself is shocked, while at the same time realizing that there is much more to this man than he had ever imagined. However, as exciting as this moment is, the actual situation on the battlefield is still not in the Avengers' favor. Thanos' army continues attacking them relentlessly, while the Avengers' resistance is gradually becoming weaker. It seems like winning this battle is impossible unless someone comes to help them. And right then, the people who were brought back by Hulk's snap begin returning to the battlefield one by one. Portal after portal starts opening, and through those portals, all the heroes who had disappeared begin coming back. The Spider-Man we had watched turn to dust returns. Black Panther returns. Doctor Strange returns. The members of the Guardians of the Galaxy return. The people Earth had once lost are now all standing together again in one place. And at that exact moment, Captain America's famous call rings out. Avengers, assemble. All the heroes who had been separated for so long are standing together once again. This scene isn't simply about gathering an army before a battle. It represents the moment when, after 5 years of grief, loss, and revenge, they finally come together again. Then the battle becomes even more intense. Thanos realizes that the Avengers have once again grown in number, so he directly destroys their main quantum tunnel. His intention is clear. He doesn't want anyone to escape into the past or anywhere else. But what a situation! No matter how hard Thanos tries to block their escape route, the Avengers still have one alternative. The backup quantum tunnel connected to Scott Lang's small van becomes their last hope. In other words, even though the main route has been destroyed, a tiny door to their original plan is still open. Meanwhile, one of the most powerful moments of the battle comes when Wanda stands directly in front of Thanos. After losing vision, all the anger and pain that had been building inside her for so long finally explodes. Wanda uses her powers and almost takes Thanos down all by herself. Even a warrior as powerful as Thanos becomes temporarily helpless against her attack. Wanda becomes so powerful that Thanos realizes he cannot defeat her through a normal fight. So, forced into an extreme decision, Thanos orders his army to open fire indiscriminately, without caring who gets caught in the attack. In other words, he is willing to put his own soldiers at risk just to stop Wanda. This makes the battlefield even more chaotic, with explosions, destruction, and smoke everywhere. The Avengers once again find themselves on the verge of being scattered. Just then, Captain Marvel comes down from the sky. Her level of power is so immense that she single-handedly destroys Thanos' massive warship. In an instant, a major advantage Thanos had in the air is taken away. It seems like the Avengers are finally guaranteed to win. But Thanos is not someone who gives up that easily. The most important thing is still within his reach, the Infinity Gauntlet. With all 6 stones together, the gauntlet holds enough power to change the entire universe, and now it is once again under Thanos' control. The Avengers realize that if Thanos manages to snap his fingers one more time, there will be no way for them to turn the outcome of this battle back in their favor. At that exact moment, Doctor Strange looks at Tony. He doesn't give him any long explanation. He simply makes a gesture, but Tony understands what that gesture means. Because Doctor Strange already knew that among countless possible futures, there was only one future in which they could win. And Tony now realizes that this is that one opportunity. Tony cleverly tries to take the gauntlet away from Thanos. Since it is impossible to defeat Thanos through brute strength, Tony uses the technology in his armor to transfer all 6 Infinity Stones from the gauntlet into his own armor. It happens so quickly that Thanos doesn't even realize what has happened. One moment, the gauntlet is in Thanos' hand, and the next, all 6 stones are inside Tony's armor. Then Tony raises his hand. The same power that Thanos had used 5 years earlier with a snap of his fingers to destroy half the universe is now in Tony's hand. Tony snaps his fingers, and in an instant, Thanos and his entire army begin turning to dust. One by one, his soldiers disappear. Thanos himself realizes that there is nothing he can do anymore. In the end, the same Thanos who once held the fate of the entire universe in his hands also turns to dust and is gone. But the price of this victory is devastating. The combined power of all 6 Infinity Stones is more than an ordinary human body can withstand. Even when Hulk performed the snap, his body was severely damaged. And when Tony uses that same power, his body can no longer withstand it either. Even though he wins the battle, Tony does not survive. This creates one of the most emotional moments in the entire movie. Tony Stark, the man who throughout the entire story repeatedly made the impossible possible with his intelligence, technology, and ego, ultimately saves everyone by giving his own life. He didn't just defeat Thanos, he sacrificed his life to save his family, his friends, and the entire world. The man who once believed that his own life was the most important thing ultimately gives his life for everyone else. Then comes Tony Stark's funeral. Almost everyone he knew is there. The Avengers, his friends, his family. Everyone stands silently and says goodbye to him. Tony's death feels like the end of an entire era, because this man had been one of the most important parts of the Avengers from the very beginning. His journey began as a selfish, arrogant billionaire, but it ends with him becoming a hero who sacrifices himself for everyone else. On the other hand, Thor's life also takes a new direction. He hands over the responsibility of his kingdom to Valkyrie, because Thor realizes that there is still a new life waiting ahead of him. He sets off into space on a new journey with the Guardians of the Galaxy. His relationship with Peter Quill's team also reaches a pretty funny point, because Thor himself doesn't really know where he is going, but he is ready for a new adventure. And finally, it's Captain America's turn. An important part of the time travel mission is still left to complete. The 6 Infinity Stones and Thor's Mjolnir, all the things they took from different times and places, must be returned to exactly where they came from. Steve takes this responsibility upon himself. He travels back into the past to return each of the stones to their proper place, one by one. But there's a problem. Steve doesn't return at the scheduled time. Everyone keeps waiting. Then the question comes up, where did he go? Did the mission fail? Or did he somehow get stuck somewhere in time? Just then, they notice an elderly man sitting in the distance. At first, no one understands who he is. But gradually, they realize that this old man is none other than Steve Rogers, because Steve didn't return to his own time after traveling into the past. Instead, he decided to return to the life he had left behind. He chose the normal life he had never been able to have with Peggy Carter. After all those years of war, responsibility, and sacrifice, Steve finally chose a life for himself. He spends the rest of his life with Peggy and gradually grows old, following the normal passage of time. In the end, Steve hands his old shield to Sam Wilson. This isn't simply about handing over a shield. Through this moment, he passes his responsibility, his identity, and the legacy of being Captain America into someone else's hands. In other words, even though Steve's story ends here, the story of Captain America does not. Instead, a new person takes on that responsibility, and so, on one side, Tony Stark brings an entire era to an end by giving his life, while on the other side, Steve Rogers fulfills his old dream and passes the responsibility on to the next generation. Thor leaves in search of a new adventure, and the original Avengers team breaks apart, but the story and legacy they leave behind remain. And this is where the movie becomes more than just a story about defeating Thanos. It becomes the farewell to an old era and the beginning of a new chapter, where the Avengers are standing not only against Thanos, but his entire army. Friends, up until now, we have been giving a brief explanation of this movie. I hope you enjoyed it. Now we're going to discuss some hidden twists from this movie. This will help you understand the story within the movie and learn about some of its most interesting points. So, let's begin. The first twist is that Thanos himself had destroyed the stones. Thanos was extremely clever, and when the Avengers finally found him, they thought they could take the stones away from the gauntlet and fix everything. But it turned out to be completely different. Thanos had already destroyed all the stones, and he had played a mental game to make sure no one else could undo what he had done. The situation here is this. After fighting Thanos for so long, when the Avengers finally managed to find him, they have one major hope in their minds. Maybe now they can fix everything. Because they know that the Infinity Stones in Thanos' possession are the key to the entire disaster. Thanos had used all 6 stones together to snap his fingers and turn half of all life in the universe to dust. So the Avengers believed that if they could take control of the gauntlet, they could use that same power to bring everyone who had disappeared back. But as soon as they reach Thanos, something devastating comes to light. When they find him, Thanos is no longer as powerful as he once was, but he has already made his biggest move. When the Avengers look at the gauntlet, they realize there are no Infinity Stones inside it anymore. All 6 stones are gone. At first, it seems strange, but the truth quickly becomes clear. Thanos has personally destroyed all 6 Infinity Stones. What a situation! After going through so much trouble to collect all 6 stones, after fighting such a massive war, and after erasing half of all life in the universe, instead of keeping the stones for himself, Thanos has destroyed them. Normally, if someone had access to a source of infinite power like this, they would hide it somewhere safe, preserve it for the future, or use it to become even more powerful. But Thanos thought completely differently. To him, the Infinity Stones were nothing more than a way to accomplish one specific task. He believed that once he had reduced the population of the universe by half, his responsibility was finished. So once the job was done, there was no reason to keep the stones alive. In fact, if the stones remained, someone could use them in the future to reverse his decision. And Thanos wanted to eliminate that possibility completely. Now we can see just how calmly Thanos had planned everything. He wasn't only thinking about defeating the Avengers. He had also made sure that even after his own death, no one would be able to undo what he had done. Because Thanos knew that one day someone might find him. Someone might even kill him. But if he no longer had the Infinity Stones, then even killing him would not give anyone a way to bring back half of the universe. This is where the Avengers' biggest disappointment begins. They had come this far with one specific goal in mind. They would find Thanos, take the stones from him, and then use the snap to bring back everyone who had disappeared. But when they arrive, they realize that the most important part of their plan is already gone. There is no opportunity to take the stones from Thanos because the stones are no longer with him. Things become even more horrifying when Thanos reveals that he destroyed them intentionally. In other words, even if the Avengers had never found him, he had already completed his plan in such a way that the path to reversing his actions was closed. His goal wasn't simply to defeat Earth or the Avengers. He wanted his decision to become permanent. And this reveals an important side of Thanos' character. He doesn't want power simply for the sake of having power. He doesn't want to keep the Infinity Stones and build some new empire. According to his beliefs, he came to accomplish one specific task. And once that task was complete, he destroyed the very source of that power. The interesting thing is that, as a villain, his greatest fear wasn't the Avengers' strength. His greatest fear was that someone might undo what he had done. The Avengers then realized that simply killing Thanos isn't enough. The people have already disappeared, and there is no way to bring them back. This failure breaks Thor even further from the inside. He already carried the guilt of failing to stop Thanos. And now, after learning that the stones have also been destroyed, he sees no reason to wait any longer. Filled with anger and frustration, Thor attacks Thanos directly and eventually kills him. But here comes another bitter truth. Even after Thanos dies, the people who turn to dust do not come back. Because Thanos had already done what he came to do. The Avengers can kill him, but they have no way to reverse his decision. I think this event makes one of the most important things about the beginning of Endgame completely clear. This is no longer a story about defeating Thanos, because they eventually defeat him anyway. The real problem is that even after defeating Thanos, the damage he caused remains. In other words, killing the enemy doesn't necessarily end the war if there is no way to repair the destruction they left behind. That is why, even after 5 years pass, the Avengers still cannot return to normal life. Some have lost their families, some have lost their friends, and some have lost the entire world they once knew. Everyone knows that Thanos is dead, but their loved ones are gone too. And there is no simple solution to this impossible problem. Eventually, this impossible situation creates the path for Scott Lang to return from the quantum realm and introduce a new idea. If they can travel into the past and collect the Infinity Stones, then maybe it will be possible to repair the destruction in the present. In other words, the Avengers begin traveling back through time to find an alternative to the path Thanos had deliberately closed. The most dangerous part is that Thanos probably believed his decision would be permanent. He had destroyed all 6 stones to make sure that no one could reverse what he had done. But there was one thing he never accounted for. The Avengers might find a way to use time itself. And that is where the biggest and most dangerous plan of Endgame begins. Twist number 2. Even if they go back into the past and kill Thanos, it won't actually help them here. Rhodey suggests going back in time and killing the younger Thanos. But Hulk explains the situation clearly to them. The past can be changed without changing the present. Instead, it only creates a new timeline and a completely new situation, and that could potentially become even more dangerous than the present. Here's the situation. When the Avengers realize that Thanos has destroyed the Infinity Stones, their biggest question is, what are they going to do now? Because even if they kill Thanos in the present, the people who disappeared are not coming back. That's when, during the discussion about the time travel plan, Rhodey comes up with a pretty awesome idea. His logic is that if they can travel into the past, why not find the younger Thanos and kill him before he ever becomes powerful? Then Thanos would never grow up to become the person they know. He would never get the chance to collect the Infinity Stones. And maybe this entire disaster would never happen. It sounds very simple, but this is where Hulk explains something extremely important. Normally, we assume that if we go back into the past and change an event, the future will change as well. But the rules of Endgame don't work that way. According to Hulk's explanation, even if they change something in the past, their own present timeline will not disappear or be rewritten. Instead, that change will create a completely separate, parallel timeline. Think about it this way. If they really went back into the past, found the younger Thanos, and killed him, the Thanos in their present would not suddenly disappear. In their 2019 reality, Thanos has already carried out his plan, turned half of all life into dust, and destroyed the Infinity Stones. None of that would change. Instead, a new timeline would branch off from that point in the past, where Thanos would never grow up and cause the same disaster. This shows how the movie intentionally turns a common idea about time travel upside down. They cannot go into the past and repair their own present. Instead, every major change they make in the past can create an entirely new reality. So killing the younger Thanos would provide no benefit to the Avengers' own world. It's kind of like this. You go back in time to fix a problem that exists today, but while you're there, you change the story of another world. The damage that has already happened in your own world would still remain. It simply wouldn't happen in that other reality. So even though Rhodey's idea sounds simple and effective, it actually doesn't solve their original problem at all. And this is where Hulk's explanation completely changes the direction of the Avengers' plan. They realize that their goal isn't to go into the past and stop Thanos. Instead, they need to bring back the people who have already disappeared from their own present timeline. And to do that, they need to bring back certain things from the past that can be used to repair the damage in the present. Those things are the 6 Infinity Stones. Because Thanos has destroyed all the stones in the present, the Avengers have no other option. They have to travel into the past, collect the stones from specific points in time, bring them into the present, use them, and then return each stone to its original time and location once the mission is complete. There's another extremely important detail here. If they take the stones and fail to return them, it could create major problems in those timelines, because each Infinity Stone is part of the balance of a specific point in time. So the mission isn't simply about stealing the stones and bringing them to the present. Returning them to exactly where they belong after the job is done is also an extremely important part of the plan. This is why the Avengers mission becomes so dangerous. They now have an opportunity to travel through time, but they cannot change the past however they want, because one wrong decision could create an entirely new timeline. I think without this rule, the story of Endgame would have been completely different, because then they could simply travel back in time, kill Thanos while he was still young, and perhaps the entire story of Infinity War would never happen. But the movie doesn't take that easy solution. Instead, it shows that the past and present can exist alongside each other, and an event that happens in one timeline doesn't simply erase what happened in another timeline. In other words, Rhodey's idea wasn't a bad one, but it was a solution to the wrong problem. If they went back into the past and stopped Thanos, they might save a new world. But their own world, the one where people have already disappeared, would remain exactly as it is. So, in the end, the Avengers decide that instead of trying to kill Thanos in the past, they will collect the things that can be used to bring back the people in the present. And this is where their biggest time heist begins. The impossible mission of splitting up across different points in time to collect all 6 Infinity Stones. The strangest part is that even though the Avengers travel into the past, they aren't actually trying to change the past. They are using the past to fix the present. And that small difference is what makes the movie's entire time travel rule so important. Twist number 3. The Ancient One was initially unwilling to give up the Time Stone because she had another plan and was trying to protect something bigger. When Hulk asked her for the Time Stone, the Ancient One refused to give it to him. But after hearing that Doctor Strange willingly gave the stone to Thanos in the future, she realized that this was not some small or ordinary event. It was part of a much larger plan, and that was why she eventually gave him the stone. Here's the situation. When the Avengers plan to travel into the past to collect the Infinity Stones, one of their biggest problems is the Time Stone. At that point, the stone is in the possession of the Ancient One. And this isn't something as simple as asking an ordinary person for a rock. The Time Stone is one of the most powerful weapons on Earth, and the Ancient One knows exactly how dangerous it could be if it falls into the wrong hands. When Hulk goes to her and asks for the Time Stone, the Ancient One immediately refuses. From her perspective, the situation is very clear. Just because someone has come from the future and claims to be an Avenger doesn't mean she should automatically trust them. Because if Hulk and his team take the stone away, then the Time Stone will no longer exist in that timeline. And no one knows what kind of dangerous changes that could create in the future. Normally, we might think that if you take something from the past and simply return it later, everything will be fine. But from the Ancient One's perspective, it isn't that simple. The Infinity Stones aren't just powerful rocks. They are important parts of the balance of the universe. That's why she isn't willing to simply hand the stone over after hearing Hulk's explanation. Hulk tries to explain to her that they aren't taking the stone permanently. In their present, Thanos has already destroyed all 6 Infinity Stones, so they need to borrow the stones from specific points in the past. Once their mission is complete, they will return each stone to its proper time and place. But even after hearing this, the Ancient One still isn't completely convinced. The thing is, the Ancient One knows a lot about the future, but she doesn't fully understand this specific plan. She doesn't know why Hulk has come from the future asking her for the Time Stone. So, from her perspective, her initial decision is completely reasonable. The stone cannot be given away. But then Hulk gives her a piece of information that completely changes the situation. He tells her that in the future, Doctor Strange willingly handed the Time Stone over to Thanos himself. And this is where the real twist comes in. The Ancient One knows Doctor Strange. She knows that Strange is someone who can see countless possible futures. Later in Infinity War, we learn that Strange looked at billions of possible outcomes, and among all of them, there was only one future where the Avengers had a chance to win. So when the Ancient One hears that the future Doctor Strange willingly gave the Time Stone to Thanos, something begins to become clear to her. This cannot possibly be an ordinary event. If Strange really chose to place the Time Stone directly into the hands of the enemy, then there must have been a much bigger plan behind that decision. Now, we can understand why the Ancient One realizes that Hulk's arrival is probably part of that larger plan. The Avengers didn't simply travel into the past because they wanted to. The events that happened in the future are connected to this exact moment for a specific reason. The Ancient One then explains another extremely important point to Hulk. If the Time Stone is removed from a timeline and never returned, that timeline could be placed in terrible danger. Without the Infinity Stone, the future of that reality could take a completely different path. So the Ancient One agrees to give Hulk the Time Stone, but only under one condition. The Avengers must return the stone to its exact point in time once their mission is complete. In other words, even though she places the stone in Hulk's hands, the Ancient One also places a huge responsibility on the Avengers. This scene is extremely important because this is the first time the Avengers clearly understand that their time heist isn't simply an easy mission where they travel into the past and grab whatever they need. Every move they make can have consequences for other timelines. And because of that, they have to carry out the entire mission with extreme caution. The Ancient One's decision is also remarkable. Just moments earlier, she had absolutely no intention of giving the stone to Hulk. But after learning about Doctor Strange's decision in the future, her entire perspective changes. She realizes that if Strange made such a decision in the future, then Hulk's appearance here could also be part of that same larger plan. I think this is where the importance of Doctor Strange's earlier decision becomes even clearer. In Infinity War, when Strange gives the Time Stone to Thanos, it looks from the outside as though he has simply lost. But when Endgame comes along, we understand that his decision was actually an essential part of everything that had to happen for the future to unfold the way it did. The strange thing is that the Ancient One still doesn't know exactly how everything will end, but she understands enough to realize that there must be a reason behind Doctor Strange's decision. And based on that belief, she makes a decision that allows the Avengers to move forward. Because without her giving Hulk the Time Stone, the entire time heist might never have been possible. In the end, the Time Stone ends up in Hulk's hands. And because of this one decision, the Avengers are able to move forward with the most important part of their plan. In other words, no matter how strongly the Ancient One resisted at first, the information she learned about the future helped her understand that these strange events weren't isolated incidents. Everything was part of one enormous plan. That's how serious the situation was. The Ancient One didn't simply hand an Infinity Stone over to someone. She was actually taking a huge risk in the present because she trusted what the future had revealed. And her decision ultimately gave the Avengers the opportunity they needed to move forward with their plan to somehow undo the impossible destruction caused by Thanos. Twist number 4. Loki escaping could have completely ruined the entire plan. But because of Hulk's carelessness, the Tesseract slips away, and Loki escapes with it. Because of this one mistake, the team is forced to travel to a completely different point in time to collect the stone. Here's the situation. When the Avengers travel back to New York in 2012, their entire plan has been carefully calculated. This is the exact time when the famous battle from the first Avengers movie is taking place. The city is filled with an alien invasion, The Avengers are fighting, and everything is completely chaotic. Using this chaos as cover, the Avengers from the future are trying to collect the necessary Infinity Stones without interfering too much with the events taking place around them. One of their main targets is the Space Stone inside the Tesseract. Because Thanos has already destroyed it in the present, their plan is to collect the stone from 2012 New York and bring it back to the present. Everything seems to be going according to plan. But then, one careless moment involving Hulk completely changes the situation. As Hulk tries to make his way toward the Stark Tower of that time, he gets caught up in a collision with people from the past, creating chaos around the area where the Tesseract is being kept. In the middle of that confusion, the Tesseract falls to the ground, and right at that moment, Loki reaches it. The thing is, this is the Loki who is still the villain from the first Avengers movie. He has no idea what his future holds. He doesn't know that he will eventually die at the hands of Thanos. He doesn't know that in the future, his brother Thor and the Avengers will eventually see him in a completely different way. At this point, there is only one thing that matters to him: surviving and escaping whenever he gets the chance. And that is exactly the opportunity he gets through the Tesseract. Loki picks up the Tesseract and, within moments, uses the power of the Space Stone to disappear from the scene. And this creates a huge problem for the Avengers' plan. The very stone they had planned to collect from this point in time is suddenly gone. Now we can see that the time heist was nowhere near as simple as it initially seemed. The Avengers weren't simply going into the past, picking up an Infinity Stone from a specific location, and leaving. They were surrounded by people who had absolutely no idea what the Avengers were trying to do, and were simply acting according to their own circumstances. And when someone like Loki is involved, even one small mistake can turn into a massive problem. The biggest issue was that the Avengers had built their entire plan around getting the Tesseract from 2012. Now that it was gone, their time heist would be incomplete without the Space Stone. And at that moment, they didn't even know where they could find an alternative. What a situation! They had taken an enormous risk by traveling into the past just to collect one stone, and within a few moments, that exact stone disappeared right in front of them because of one mistake. Now they basically had two options: either find Loki and somehow recover the Tesseract in that same timeline, or travel even further back and collect the same stone from another point in time. But there was another complication. Once Loki escaped with the Tesseract, the events of 2012 were no longer unfolding exactly as the Avengers had planned. The longer they stayed there, the greater the chance that their presence would be discovered. So they needed an alternative plan quickly. In the end, Tony Stark and Captain America decide to travel even further back to 1970 to collect the Space Stone from that point in time. They learn that the Tesseract is being stored at a military facility during that period, and at the same location. They can also find the special particles needed for quantum travel. In other words, because of one mistake, the entire plan takes a completely different direction, and this part shows one of the most important aspects of the time heist in Endgame. The Avengers weren't able to control everything in the past however they wanted. Instead, the events of the past were also affecting their plans. No matter how perfectly they planned everything, one small, unexpected event could send the entire mission in a completely different direction. And Loki's escape wasn't simply a matter of losing one Infinity Stone. Because of it, Tony and Captain America had to travel to 1970. And the interesting thing is that if this mistake had never happened, Tony might never have had that incredible encounter with his father, Howard Stark. When Tony arrives at that location in 1970, he meets his father, even though Howard has no idea that the man standing in front of him is actually his future son. One of the most emotional moments of Tony's entire life happens as a result of this mistake. In the same way, Captain America also gets to see Peggy Carter from a distance. He sees the woman he once loved, but he doesn't reveal his identity. So the problem created by Loki's escape indirectly becomes the foundation for several much bigger moments later in the story. Normally, when we see a mistake happen, we assume that everything has gone wrong. But here, the situation is strange. Hulk's carelessness causes the Tesseract to slip away, which obviously makes their mission much more complicated. But that same mistake is what takes Tony and Captain America to 1970, where they experience moments that later have a deep impact on their characters. At that time, however, none of that mattered to the Avengers. They had only one thing on their minds. They had to get the Space Stone by any means necessary. Because if even one stone was missing, their entire plan could fail. So eventually, they head toward another point in time. After dealing with the problem created by Loki's escape, they collect the Tesseract from 1970. And this event proves that the time heist was never a perfectly controlled plan. Instead, it was an impossible mission built around mistakes, danger, unexpected situations, and last-minute decisions. The most interesting part is that Loki's escape later opens the door to an even bigger story in the MCU. After the 2012 version of Loki escapes with the Tesseract, a completely different chain of events begins, which eventually becomes the foundation for an entirely separate timeline and story. In other words, what was a massive problem for the Avengers eventually becomes the beginning of another completely new story. Twist number 5. Thanos learns everything because of the connection between the two versions of Nebula. The future Nebula's memories were still stored within her, and Thanos cleverly figured out how to access that information and learn about the Avengers' future plan. This was one of Thanos' most unique advantages, and it leads directly to a massive turning point in the story. Here's the situation. One of the biggest weaknesses in the Avengers' time heist was Nebula. Because Nebula is a character whose body is partly mechanical, her memories weren't stored separately in the same way they would be in an ordinary human. She also had a strange connection with her past version. And at first, the Avengers didn't fully understand how important or dangerous this connection could be. In 2014, Rhodey and the present-day Nebula travel to collect the Power Stone. Their goal is to take the stone from that point in time and bring it back to the present. From the outside, the mission seems relatively simple, but once they arrive there, Nebula faces something that nobody had anticipated. She comes face to face with her own past version. Here's where things become extremely strange. The present-day Nebula and the 2014 version of Nebula are people from different points in time, but they still have a connection through the mechanical parts of their bodies. In other words, some of what the past Nebula is seeing can also be experienced by the present-day Nebula. And some parts of the present-day Nebula's memories can also reach the past Nebula. The situation becomes extremely dangerous when the past Nebula begins seeing parts of the present-day Nebula's memories. And that is exactly when Thanos realizes what is happening. Thanos is still in 2014 at this point. In other words, this is several years before the main events of Avengers, Endgame. He is still on his journey to collect the Infinity Stones, and beside him are his two daughters, Gamora and Nebula. But because of Nebula's strange memory connection, Thanos gains access to information that he was never supposed to know. Through the memories of the past version of Nebula, Thanos begins to see glimpses of events from the future. He learns how the Avengers will fight against him in the future, how they will travel through time, which points in time they will visit to collect the Infinity Stones. And most importantly, he learns that they are planning to undo everything he has done. What a situation! The Avengers were carrying out the time heist as secretly as possible so that Thanos would have absolutely no way of discovering their plan. But in the end, this strange connection inside the body of one of the people closest to them is what exposes their entire plan. Thanos realizes that the Avengers in the future have refused to simply accept what he has done. They are planning to travel back in time, collect the Infinity Stones, and bring back all the people he erased with his snap. Now we can understand why Thanos changes his plan so quickly. He realizes that the Avengers have found a way to defeat him in the future, and because of that, he doesn't want to wait any longer. Thanos then makes another important decision. He isn't simply going to attack the Avengers in the future. Instead, he is going to follow them from the past. In other words, he will travel to the very point in time where the Avengers are trying to stop him. And this creates one of the biggest time travel twists in Endgame. The Avengers thought they were going into the past to take the Infinity Stones away from Thanos. But they had no idea that the Thanos from the past had already learned about their future plan. Once Thanos gets this information, he gains a huge advantage. He knows what is going to happen in the future. He knows where the Avengers are going, why they are going there, and how they are planning to undo everything he has done. But Thanos doesn't stop with simply gathering information. He turns the past version of Nebula into part of his plan. The present-day Nebula is taken out of the equation, and the past version of Nebula is sent into the future in her place. And this is where the situation becomes even more dangerous. The past Nebula looks exactly the same, has the same type of body, and is another version of the exact same person. So at first, the Avengers have no idea that one of the people among them is actually a spy working for Thanos. This Nebula then connects herself to the Avengers' systems and eventually gains access to the quantum tunnel. Thanos uses that information to create a way to reach the future. The thing is, the Avengers themselves opened the doorway through time, and Thanos simply turns that same doorway against them. They thought time travel was going to be their greatest advantage, but in the end, it becomes the source of their greatest danger. Then, when the Avengers successfully bring back all the people who were lost, Thanos arrives in the future with his massive army. Within moments, he attacks the Avengers' compound and destroys everything. The most dangerous part is that if Thanos had never learned about the future through Nebula's memories, he might never have discovered that the Avengers had traveled through time. And if that had been the case, their time heist might have been completed much more safely. In other words, the failure of the Avengers' plan wasn't caused only by a powerful enemy. There was also an unknown weakness hidden within their own plan, and that weakness was Nebula. I think this twist is also extremely important for Nebula's character. For so long, we had seen her as someone who was a victim of Thanos' abuse. But the old mechanical modifications connected to her body ultimately create a situation that allows Thanos to discover the entire plan for the future. And the strangest part is that Nebula never intentionally revealed anything. She was simply trapped in that shared memory connection with her past version. But Thanos exploited that weakness so perfectly that even the Avengers' most secret mission was no longer a secret from him. In the end, this seemingly small connection completely changes the course of the war. The Avengers successfully travel into the past and collect the stones. But after learning about their plan, Thanos also travels through time and arrives in the present. And that is where the final and biggest battle of Endgame begins. Sixth twist. Captain America faces his own past self. In 2012, when the Avengers go back to retrieve the Infinity Stones, the present-day Captain America unexpectedly comes face-to-face with himself. Captain America himself. Seeing two versions of the same person fighting each other was both strange and extremely fascinating. Here's how it happens. When the Avengers return to New York in 2012 to collect the Infinity Stones, they aren't just dealing with the enemies and battles from the past. They also face the possibility of encountering their own past versions. And that possibility actually becomes reality for Captain America. At that time, the Battle of New York from the first Avengers movie is taking place. The city is under attack by an alien army. Destruction is happening everywhere. and the Avengers are busy fighting the invasion. Meanwhile, the present-day Tony, Captain America, Hulk, and Scott Lang are carrying out their mission in the middle of all this chaos. Their goal is to collect several Infinity Stones, but their biggest problem is that they cannot interfere too much with past events, because even a small change could potentially create a new timeline. Then the present-day Captain America finds himself in a very strange situation. He sees someone standing in front of him who looks exactly like him. It feels almost like he is looking into a mirror, because that person is also Captain America. In other words, they are the same person, with the same face, the same body, the same uniform, and the same shield. But they belong to different points in time. One is the present-day Steve Rogers, while the other is the 2012 version of Steve, who still has no idea what his future holds. When the younger Captain America sees the present-day version, he assumes that an enemy must somehow be impersonating him. Without wasting any time, he immediately starts fighting his own future self. The scene is both funny and incredibly strange, because one Captain America is trying to stop the other. While both of them have almost identical fighting styles, they have the same strength, similar experience, and the same mastery of the shield. As a result, the fight reaches a point where neither one can easily defeat the other. One knows exactly how the other will attack, while the other can predict the same moves because they essentially think alike. This creates one of the strangest moments in the movie, where the present-day Captain America has to deal with his younger self in a way that he would never have to deal with an ordinary enemy. Eventually, the present-day Captain manages to stop his past self. But this scene isn't simply meant to be a funny or entertaining moment. There is something much more important hidden beneath it. The 2012 Captain America has no idea what is going to happen in his future. He doesn't know that one day he will fight Thanos. He doesn't know that he will lose many of the people he loves. And he has no idea where his life will ultimately take him. The present-day Captain, however, knows everything. He knows his future, his mistakes, his sacrifices, and the biggest decisions he will eventually have to make. So standing face to face with his younger self isn't simply another fight for him. In a way, it is like confronting his own past. Think about it. If someone had to fight their own younger version, they would be able to predict almost every move because they know exactly how that person thinks. That is what makes this scene so entertaining. The present-day Captain isn't simply fighting another version of himself. In a way, he is fighting his old habits, his old fighting style, and the person he used to be. And then the movie gives us a small but important hint. When the present-day Captain looks at his younger self, there is a strange sense of realization in his eyes. It's almost as if he understands that this is the person he used to be. Meanwhile, for the 2012 Captain, the entire situation is completely unbelievable. Standing in front of him is someone who looks exactly like him, fights exactly like him, and somehow knows things about him that nobody else should know. Usually, in time travel stories, we see characters from the past encountering their future selves. But here, the movie takes that concept and uses it in a very direct and entertaining way. A present-day hero literally comes face to face with his own past self and has to defeat him. However, this incident makes one more thing clear. The time heist was actually just as chaotic as it was carefully planned. No matter how hard the Avengers tried to avoid interfering with past events, their own presence was creating new problems along the way. There is also an interesting side to this incident. When the present-day Captain America sees his past self, he is forced to confront a major truth about his own life. Later, when he has to decide whether to return to the present and continue his old life or stay in the past and reunite with the love he had lost. This entire time travel experience takes on a different meaning. Ultimately, the fight between Captain America and his past self is not simply a funny moment in Endgame. It becomes a strange example of confronting time, identity, and one's former self. One Captain America is still preparing to face the future, while the other has already lived through that future and returned from it. One has no idea what is waiting ahead, while the other knows exactly how much he is going to lose. That is why the confrontation between these two versions becomes one of the movie's most memorable moments. Captain America's greatest opponent isn't an alien, a robot, or even a supervillain. His greatest opponent, for that brief moment, is his own younger self, Seventh Twist. Natasha's sacrifice was essentially a battle between two friends to obtain the Soul Stone. Clint and Natasha are faced with an impossible choice. They are told that one of them must sacrifice their own life to obtain the stone. Eventually, Natasha manages to stop Clint and throws herself off the cliff, sacrificing her own life to save her closest friend. Here's how it happens. When the Avengers arrive on Vormir, they don't initially know what price they will have to pay for the Soul Stone. The Red Skull explains the condition clearly. In order to obtain the stone, they must lose someone they truly love. In other words, there is no way to simply fight for the stone or outsmart the Guardian. Someone has to sacrifice their life. When Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff realize that one of them has to die, neither of them is willing to allow the other to make that sacrifice. Their relationship isn't simply that of two Avengers working together. They share years of friendship, trust, and a deep bond with each other. Normally, in a situation like this, someone might try to save themselves. But here, the exact opposite happens. Clint believes Natasha's life is more valuable than his own. At the same time, Natasha believes Clint has to survive because he needs to return to his family. Clint has already lost his wife and children because of the snap, and Natasha knows how important it is for him to have the chance to return to them. The situation becomes clear. They have both made the same decision. They want to save each other. And that's when a strange, silent competition begins. Who can stop the other person and sacrifice themselves first? That becomes their final battle. Both of them try to convince the other to let them go, but neither is willing to listen. Clint repeatedly tries to stop Natasha because he realizes what she is planning. Natasha, meanwhile, understands that if Clint keeps trying to save her, neither of them may be able to complete the sacrifice. Finally, Natasha makes a decision that changes everything. She manages to separate Clint from herself and, when she gets the opportunity, throws herself into the deep chasm. Clint makes one final attempt to catch her, but Natasha manages to let go of his hand. Because at that moment, one thing matters more to her than anything else. Clint has to survive and return to his family. Then comes the heartbreaking moment. Natasha falls to her death, and at that exact moment, the Soul Stone appears in Clint's hands. The person Natasha sacrificed herself to save is the same person who ultimately has to return with the stone. And the most tragic part is that Natasha had no idea whether the Avengers' plan would actually succeed after her sacrifice. She didn't know whether Hulk would be able to bring everyone back. She didn't know whether the Avengers would defeat Thanos and his army in the final battle. She didn't even know whether Clint would ever get his family back. And yet, she still gave up her life. That's what makes Natasha's sacrifice even more meaningful. She wasn't sacrificing herself for a guaranteed victory. She made that decision at a moment when the future was completely uncertain. I think one of the most important aspects of this scene is that Natasha doesn't treat her death as some kind of heroic performance. To her, it is simply a responsibility she has to fulfill. Her final goal is to give Clint the opportunity to return to his family. And if we look back at their history, the moment becomes even more emotional. Natasha and Clint had both gone through extremely dark periods in their lives, and they had always been there for each other. On Vormir, their friendship faces its final and ultimate test. In the end, Natasha wins that battle, not by defeating Clint, but by making sure that he survives. 8. Hulk's decision to use the Infinity Gauntlet. The decision to have Hulk use the Infinity Gauntlet was extremely risky. The Infinity Stones released an enormous amount of gamma radiation and energy, and Hulk was uniquely capable of enduring it because of his connection to gamma radiation. He had essentially been transformed by gamma radiation himself, giving him a much greater ability to withstand its effects. The situation was like this. Once the Avengers successfully gathered all 6 Infinity Stones, their biggest question became, who would actually use them? Because using all 6 stones at once was not something an ordinary person could survive. The Avengers already knew how devastating the power of the stones could be. Once the gauntlet was ready, everyone understood that whoever used it would have to withstand an unimaginable amount of energy. This wasn't the power of just one stone. The Power Stone, Space Stone, Time Stone, Reality Stone, Mind Stone, and Soul Stone would all be activated simultaneously. Each stone had a completely different ability, and combining all 6 made the power almost impossible for an ordinary body to withstand. That's when Bruce Banner, the Hulk, stepped forward. Hulk's body had a unique relationship with gamma radiation. Bruce himself had become the Hulk because of exposure to gamma radiation. Because of that, his body could tolerate this type of radiation far better than the others. Even so, it wasn't as simple as saying, Hulk can handle gamma radiation, so there won't be a problem. Bruce knew that he was still taking an enormous risk. Thanos had previously used the Infinity Gauntlet to erase half of all life in the universe. Even Thanos, a powerful Titan, suffered severe physical damage from using the stones. His arm was badly burned and his body was weakened. So the real question was, how long could a human body, even Hulk's, survive that kind of power? After Natasha's sacrifice, Clint returned with the Soul Stone. Now there was only one thing left to do. Someone had to put on the gauntlet and snap their fingers. Some might think that because Hulk was the strongest Avenger, this would be easy for him. But that wasn't the case at all. His body was incredibly powerful, but the Infinity Stones weren't simply delivering a physical blow. Their energy was spreading through his entire body in a way that ordinary physical strength couldn't protect against. So when Hulk took the gauntlet, he knew there was a real possibility that he would pay a terrible price. At that moment, Bruce made a major decision. Even if using the gauntlet destroyed his body, he was willing to do it. The hope of bringing everyone back depended on him. There was no other way to restore the people who had disappeared. The Avengers had successfully traveled through time and collected the stones, but unless someone actually activated them, the entire time heist would have been meaningless. As soon as Hulk put on the gauntlet and activated the stones, his entire body began to shake. An enormous amount of energy spread through him. The effects could be seen starting from his arm and moving throughout his body. And suddenly, the man who had been standing among the Avengers as one of their most powerful members looked as though he was being pushed to the edge of death. Still, Bruce did not stop, because what stood in front of him was not just his own life. He was carrying the lives of billions of people who had been erased from existence 5 years earlier by Thanos' snap. Finally, Hulk made that famous snap, and at that exact moment, the people who had disappeared into dust across the universe began to return. All over Earth, those who had suddenly vanished 5 years earlier came back into existence. But the price was devastating for Hulk himself. His entire right arm was left severely damaged, and his body suffered the terrifying effects of the Infinity Stones' combined power. In other words, Hulk succeeded, but he had to pay for that success with his own body. I think this moment is also extremely important for Bruce Banner's character. For so long, he had struggled to control the Hulk inside him. At times, he was afraid of the Hulk. and at other times, he saw his power as a curse. But in Endgame, that same power ultimately became the greatest weapon for bringing billions of people back. There is something almost ironic about it. The gamma radiation that once changed Bruce's life became the very reason he was able to accomplish something that no one else would have dared to do. In other words, what was once his curse ultimately became his greatest strength. Hulk's sacrifice can also be seen as the next step after Natasha's sacrifice. Natasha gave her life to obtain the Soul Stone, while Hulk risked destroying his own body to use the entire gauntlet, including that stone. Their sacrifices were different, but their purpose was the same: to save everyone else. Hulk knew that after making the snap, he might never be the same again. Yet he did not back down. At that moment, the safety of his own body mattered far less to him than the lives of billions of people. And that is exactly why Hulk made the snap despite the enormous risk. This is where we understand that the Avengers' victory did not come simply because they had powerful heroes. At every stage, someone had to sacrifice something. Natasha sacrificed her life. Hulk sacrificed his body. And ultimately, Tony Stark had to sacrifice his own life. So Hulk's snap was not simply the moment when the people who had disappeared were brought back. It was the moment when he used his own power, his past, and even his damaged body one final time to give the entire world a second chance. Friends, that brings us to the end of our discussion about some of the hidden twists in this movie. I hope you found these hidden twists interesting. Now we are going to take a look at some reviews and basic information about the movie. And for this section, we are taking information from Wikipedia. As I mentioned earlier, Avengers. Endgame was released in 2019. It is a superhero movie and serves as the sequel to Avengers: Infinity War. The movie was also inspired by the Marvel comic books on which the entire Avengers series is based. It is a superhero movie that brings together numerous superheroes and shows how they struggle to save society, humanity, and ultimately, the entire world. The movie was directed by Anthony Russo and Joe Russo, with the screenplay written by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. The producer was Kevin Feige. As for the cast, the movie stars Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Mark Ruffalo, Chris Hemsworth, Scarlett Johansson, Jeremy Renner, Don Cheadle, Paul Rudd, Brie Larson, Karen Gillan, Danai Gurira, and many others. The cinematography was handled by Trent Opalock, while the editing was done by Jeffrey Ford and Matthew Schmidt. The movie was produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. It premiered at the Los Angeles Convention Center on April 22, 2019, before being released in the United States on April 26, 2019. The movie has a runtime of 181 minutes. Its initial budget was around $356 million, although the final production cost reportedly reached around $400 million. At the box office, the movie earned approximately $2.799 billion worldwide. That gives you an idea of just how enormous the movie's commercial success was. So, I hope you enjoyed the movie and this entire explanation. If you liked the movie, be sure to let us know in the comments and tell us which movie you would like to see explained next. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, everyone.